Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed, the first video here from my new studio. Still working a little bit on the audio, so hopefully it isn't too bad, but yeah, things are looking, well, a little different right now. Anyway, today I wanted to do a quick recap / analysis video on AMD's Zen 4 launch and touch on a few other tidbits of news that have been happening lately that we just haven't had a heap of time to look at. So AMD launched their new series of Zen 4 Ryzen 7000 processors about a week and a half ago now. Hopefully you've all seen our reviews of the 4 models. There are certainly a number of strengths to these new parts, including the key one of performance. They are quite powerful processors. However, AMD has faced a bit of a hurdle since their introduction, and that is convincing people to actually buy them. We've heard from multiple sources over the last few weeks that sales for Zen 4 processors are weaker than expected, even factoring in current market conditions. So let's talk about that and why this may be occurring. To start with, AMD processors as a whole are still immensely popular and continue to outsell Intel equivalents quite substantially in the enthusiast DIY market. Of current sales, AMD has around a 70% share, with some variance depending on the source you look at or ask. However, the vast majority of these parts, even in the days after AMD's Zen 4 launch, are for now older AM4 processors. One great source is Tech Epiphany over on Twitter, who catalogs the sales volumes of CPUs from Mind Factory, and while the data is strong for AMD as a whole, it's not great for AM5 specifically. In launch week, 78% of AMD sales were for older AM4 parts, and in the week following, so the week that's just gone really, that increased to 94%. While these figures for AM5 are better than what Intel achieved for their Alder Lake launch last year, AM5 sales are slow compared to the previous few Zen launches. One retailer that we spoke to said that comparing 7000 series to 5000 series, it feels like it will take them months to sell the volumes of Zen 4 chips they sold in just a few hours at the Zen 3 launch. Across the retailers, we've been told the Ryzen 9 7950X is comfortably the highest selling part, followed by the 7700X, with much weaker sales for the other two models. One theme we heard is that the launch is top-heavy. In other words, the buyers of AM5 are largely interested in premium, high-end builds rather than budget models. This contrasts to a typical launch and typical CPU sales where budget and mainstream offerings are usually the most popular by a substantial margin. Words we heard to describe the launch include things like disappointing and slow. Of course, another reliable indicator for CPU sales is the Amazon best-selling processors list, and again we see a similar theme, a domination by AMD, but unimpressive results for Zen 4 specifically. The top-selling Zen 4 part right now is the 7950X in 18th position, behind the 5950X, and several Intel parts including the 12700KF and 12900K. No other Zen 4 part ranks in the top 30. For a period last week, Micro Center were offering free DDR5 memory kits with the purchase of some Zen 4 CPUs. So why are sales low and worse than expected? Well, one key factor at the moment is of course the economic climate worldwide. We're in a recession, which is weakening demand for PC hardware substantially. One retailer we spoke to was keen to stress that while Zen 4 CPU sales are weaker than expected even in the current climate, the entire business right now was slower than normal for this time of year. AMD was even feeling the pinch before the launch of Zen 4. They missed their revenue guidance for Q3 by $1 billion, which is a pretty huge number, as client revenue was down 40% year on year. This was a standout number in their report, given that data center sales and gaming sales were both up year on year and at worst flat compared to last quarter. There just isn't strong demand for consumer CPUs at the moment. But that's not the entire story. Another key factor is simply the strength of the AM4 platform and its longevity. A significant portion of desktop PC owners have an AM4 system after years of strong sales for Zen processors, and many of these owners have built systems primarily with gaming in mind. As we discussed in our Zen 4 reviews, these new Ryzen 7000 parts don't present a strong value proposition to existing AM4 owners. The cost to switch platforms is very high, and the level of performance on offer for gaming isn't all that different to the AM4 compatible Ryzen 7 5800X3D. Unless you wanted to future-proof your system for some reason, there's really no compelling reason to buy Zen 4 over the 5800X3D that would be drop-in compatible with any AM4 motherboard you might already own. This leads to a situation where Zen 4 is targeting a much smaller potential customer base than with previous Zen products. Gamers would only consider Zen 4 if they were coming from an older platform, largely Intel platforms in that case, or possibly first and second gen Ryzen if they wanted to go, super high end and ensure future proofing. The other main target market is people building an entirely new system where you're not really thinking about what hardware you have right now. And then, of course, there's the small market of premium shoppers that must have the best hardware or are interested in a system that's primarily for productivity workloads, in which case the 7950X is an excellent choice, and I think that use case is reflected in current sales figures. With AMD only targeting high-end shoppers, it's not a huge surprise that Zen 4 hasn't captured the attention of buyers that would normally spend less than $200 on their CPU, even without factoring in the AM5 platform upgrade costs. The Ryzen 5 7600X for gamers doesn't really come close to tickling the interest of budget builders. It's worse value than the Ryzen 5 5600X right now, which can be had for less than $200 US, and that's not even factoring in the 5600 non-X, which is just $160. Put simply, the Ryzen 5 7600X is too expensive to be a typical mainstream Ryzen 5 option, and indeed pretty much the entire lineup is too expensive to consider for a typical gamer, which again are most DIY PC builders. The bigger issue than the price of the processors themselves, and perhaps the second biggest factor to poor AM5 sales outside of general economic conditions, is the cost of the motherboards. In my opinion, the pricing for the X670 series, which is currently the only type of AM5 motherboard you can get, it's pretty outrageous. The cheapest board available and the only board below $250 after factoring in rebates on Newegg is the ASRock X670E PG Lightning, and there are only 4 other boards priced below $300 US, one from each main motherboard brand. This is out of 23 boards listed on Newegg in total, just 5 priced below $300. The majority of motherboard sales, and indeed pretty much all the top sellers on Amazon, are boards priced below $200 US. There isn't a single board right now in that price category for Zen 4 buyers, which is a big barrier to buying into this platform. This means the absolute cheapest AM5 CPU plus motherboard combination costs $550 US, not including DDR5 memory, a very tough ask for someone with an existing gaming PC when the 5800X3D is priced at just $430. To make matters worse, the average asking price for an AM5 motherboard on Newegg is $506 with a median of $470 US. That's crazy. Now, I know there are a few whale motherboards in here for stupidly expensive builds, for example the MSI Godlike and Asus Crosshair Extreme, but the obsession with motherboards above $450 is concerning. Asus, for example, has 7 boards priced at or above $450 compared to just 4 boards below that. MSI have 3 above $450 and 1 below, Gigabyte 2 above and 1 below, so only ASRock has more boards in the lower price category than above. A CPU launch requiring a new platform simply isn't going to be successful when the majority of the only available motherboards are that expensive. B650 and B650E boards can't arrive fast enough, hopefully offering great options below $200. And let's be honest, the features of these boards will be more than sufficient for most buyers. X670 does offer more I/O connectivity, including more PCIe lanes, more USB ports, and more SATA ports. However, B650, in particular B650E, still offers PCIe 5.0 support and plenty of connectivity for the average user. In many ways, these X670 boards are designed as workstation, almost HEDT replacement boards that are overkill for most users. So again, I think if AMD wanted a better initial reception for AM5, then they probably needed to make the B series available simultaneously with the X series to cater for a wider variety of buyers. With all that said, what we've heard from board partners is that AM5 is simply an expensive platform, and Intel will have the price advantage for motherboards this generation, even when talking about Z790 options. In fact, Z790 is available to pre-order on Newegg right now ahead of its October 20th launch, and what we find in comparison to AM5 is interesting. Of the 29 listed boards, the average price is $323 with a median of $290, including 16 boards priced below $300 and 11 below $250, although ASRock does dominate there with 7 options. Intel does have the advantage of offering a DDR4 platform, so typically the cheaper boards are DDR4 boards, but even when directly comparing DDR5 options to AM5, on 5 occasions I spotted an equivalent Z790 board that was $30 cheaper or more, typically for the more wallet-friendly models. On another 6 occasions, pricing was similar, though 5 of these were priced above $450 for either option. This doesn't factor in the availability of Z690 either, which is compatible with upcoming Raptor Lake CPUs. There doesn't appear to be a good reason why X670 is more expensive, at least that we could uncover. Both X670 and Z790 have big VRMs, support PCI 5.0 and DDR5, plus heaps of enthusiast-grade features, so there's no obvious extra that makes the AM5 platform more costly. New standards like PCI 5.0 do require better signaling, which in turn is more costly to implement, but that applies to both motherboard types, and it seems on the AMD side they're just charging more. Aside from motherboards, it's also hard to gauge how many prospective buyers are waiting to see how Intel's 13th gen CPUs perform before making a purchase. This is the sensible move, but of course not everyone chooses to do so, and I would imagine some buyers jumped on the 5800X3D after seeing our Zen 4 results if they already had an AM4 motherboard. For those that are waiting, when Intel announced Raptor Lake last week, they claimed a 15% gain in single-thread applications and a 41% gain in multi-thread performance compared to their previous older Lake processors. This comes with an increase in frequency up to 5.8 GHz with the Core i9-13900K and 6 GHz on the way with a future processor, plus more cache and more E-cores across the line. The top model has 24 cores, 8P and 16E, so double the E-cores, while the Core i7 and Core i5 models go from 4 to 8 E-cores. Pricing, at least for these K models, should be a little more expensive than some of AMD's lineup, with the Core i5-13600KF tray price starting at $294, so the retail price probably is going to be a tad above $300, so competing with the 7600X. The 12700KF should come in around $400, and the flagship Core i9 should end up around $600, so that would slot in between the 7900X and 7950X. Of particular interest to people waiting to decide what CPU to go with are Intel's gaming performance claims. While these are first-party benchmarks that should be taken with a grain of salt, Intel are claiming a modest gaming performance uplift over the 12900K, which is already quite competitive with Zen 4. Intel did show this rather bizarre chart with misleading lines instead of bars for AMD's fastest chip, the 5800X3D, but either way, Intel is suggesting the 13900K will come on top, mostly. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out in real-world benchmarks, but certainly there is a good reason to wait on buying Zen 4 until we see those results in a few weeks' time. I guess the question at the end of the day is whether AMD had a successful Zen 4 launch or a poor launch, or maybe something in between. It appears AMD's strategy was to aim for the high end, considering their high Zen 4 prices and X670 only motherboard availability. And considering sales of older Ryzen 5000 parts are still exceptionally strong, I don't think AMD would be annoyed too much. They are continuing to dominate Intel. But Zen 4 sales are also appearing to be weaker than expected, and some of the decisions AMD made to specifically focus on the high-end market would have contributed to that, especially in addition to a performance picture that's only compelling for a small subset of the overall DIY market. If Zen 4 is to be successful, it's clear that motherboard pricing needs to improve. Very few people are going to want to jump into an all-new platform while spending over $300 on a motherboard. AM5 desperately needs sub-$200 options, so I'm glad B650 is coming shortly and not many months after launch, like has been the case with some previous releases. DDR5 pricing is still higher than DDR4, but in my opinion that's not as significant of an issue as the motherboards, which frankly is an easy fix. I also think we just need to see more affordable Zen 4 options. It's something we've mentioned in both the reviews of Zen 4 and Zen 3, that having the cheapest option at $300 US is not ideal, and I think it's less ideal now when AMD needs to convince buyers to transition over to AM5 for the future of their CPU series. The way to do that is with a great value proposition that makes people think hard about whether to go for the 5800X3D or jump over to Zen 4. Right now that decision is very easy in favor of Zen 3 Vcache or budget Zen 3 parts. We're not going to see the sort of value equation that the platform needs until a 7600 non-X type part launches at around $200 US. At this point, we probably sound like broken records as we talked at length about the need for a $200 option back with Ryzen 5000 and that launch as well. Anyway, that's it for this sort of post-launch look at Zen 4 and how things are tracking. At least the positive this year compared to when Zen 3 first launched is that it's pretty easy to buy a Zen 4 processor right now. They're pretty much in stock everywhere, so you're not going to have to worry about wondering when they're going to come back in stock. I know with Zen 3, it took several months, I think quite a way into 2021 until those processors were widely available. But this generation, if you really do want a Zen 4 part, then you can go and buy now. But I probably would still wait until Intel 13th gen is revealed fully. Well, in terms of performance, at least we now have the announcement, but in terms of reviews and all that sort of thing, and then of course waiting until those B series boards are available. Anyway, that's it for this one. If you do appreciate our analysis videos and that sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel and also supporting us on Patreon and Floatplane. Links to those are in the description below. You gain access to things like our Discord community, which I think's had a lot of fun discussing all the latest launches, because it's a big release period at the moment. Lots to talk about, lots to chat with you guys about. So yeah, it's a great place to be. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.